the World News Channel. Washington. In a forceful speech on Saturday to an influential gay rights group, Hillary Rodham Clinton reaffirmed her support for gay, lesbian, bisexual and transgender Americans. Hours later, Vice President Joseph R. Biden Jr., who is contemplating his own presidential run, stood before the same organization and praised Americans who have fought for gay rights. "Love is not a political matter, it's a basic human right," Mr. Biden said to a gathering of members of the Human Rights Campaign on Saturday night. "The fact that we recognize that, it's because of you." Mr. Biden's potential candidacy has loomed over Mrs. Clinton's campaign, and the speeches on Saturday presented a rare occasion for these two former Senate colleagues and potential rivals to showcase their zeal and style on gay rights, one of the most galvanizing issues for Democratic primary voters and donors. In her address, Mrs. Clinton focused on policies she would enact with a promise to make lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender issues central to her presidency. Mr. Biden said government had not been the driver of the rapid change in gay rights, and gave credit to the people in the crowd and the Americans across the country who came out about their sexuality. Both speeches drew roaring applause and enthusiasm from the crowd. Mrs. Clinton, who addressed the organization on Saturday morning, emphasized transgender rights, which are seen as the next front in the gay rights movement in America. Transgender people are valued, they are loved, they are us, Mrs. Clinton said. She vowed to do more to curb violence against transgender people, particularly African American women, and urged the military to reverse its policy and allow transgender Americans to serve in the armed forces. Having the world at EM's strongest military, she said, doesn't just mean having the best trained forces or the biggest arsenal. It means, she added, being a leader on issues like this. Mr. Biden called transgender rights the civil rights issue of our time here and also expressed his support for allowing their service in the military. In an aside, he also called for increased gun control measures in light of the mass shooting in Oregon. The speeches allowed Mrs. Clinton and Mr. Biden to address an important constituency and powerful donor base of prominent, politically active lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender people from across the country who will be critical in the 2016 presidential contest, a group that largely views both Democrats exceedingly favorably. "I see the injustices and dangers that you and your family still face," Mrs. Clinton said. "I am running for president to end them once and for all." Mr. Biden did not offer any hints about his presidential ambitions, even amid the occasional chant of "Run Joe, run." He echoed much of what Mrs. Clinton said in her speech, calling on Congress to pass the Federal Equality Act and urging more attention to human rights abuses against gay, lesbian and transgender people abroad. The Human Rights Campaign, led by a former aide to President Bill Clinton from Arkansas, Chad Griffin, has deep ties to Mrs. Clinton and had invited her to deliver the keynote address at its gathering Saturday night. But Mrs. Clinton had a scheduling conflict as she was to appear on TMSAO Saturday Night Live, so the group added a breakfast at which she could speak. The organization also honored Tim Cook, the chief executive of Apple, who recently came out as gay. The group has started its endorsement process, with questionnaires sent to candidates, but it does not typically back a candidate until the general election. In her address, Mrs. Clinton delivered a pointed attack on Republican presidential candidates who oppose same-sex marriage and other equal protections. "You turn on the TV and you see a Republican candidate for president literally standing in the courthouse store in Kentucky," she said, referring to Mike Huckabee at EM's support of Kim Davis, the Kentucky county clerk who refused to issue marriage licenses to same-sex couples. Some gay activists say Mrs. Clinton offered a relatively delayed and cautious embrace of same-sex marriage. Mr. Biden at EM's surprising expression of support for same-sex marriage in 2012 was widely seen as prodding President Obama to take the same position days later, which was not lost on the crowd on Saturday. of his 2012 comment on Meet the Press about same-sex marriage, Mr. Biden said, "Ayo folks, I was just answering in a straightforward, direct way, what I've known my whole life," and told a story of learning tolerance as a teenager growing up in Delaware. "I absolutely love Joe Biden," said Bradley Farr, a 46-year-old who works in the aviation industry in Atlanta and was in town for the gathering. He said that he had never been a supporter of Mrs. Clinton but that she impressed him with her remarks that morning. She was more impressive in person and had such a natural ease in that environment, he said. Mrs. Clinton has in recent years rejected 2 policies from her husband at TMS administration that were seen as setting back the gay rights movement, a position she reiterated on Saturday. Thank you, the World News Channel.